What if I told you that Meghan Markle's exit from Suits wasn't just about her romance with Prince Harry? What if I told you that the story we've all been fed, the clean, polished Hollywood to royalty fairy tale, was hiding something much darker, much more controversial? At 58, Aaron Korsh, the man who created Suits and built the empire that gave Meghan her platform, has finally spoken. And what he reveals isn't just shocking. It reframes the entire story of Meghan's Hollywood years. Think about it. One of the most successful legal dramas of its time. Millions tuned in to watch the quick-witted lawyers of Pearson Spector, and right in the middle of it all was Rachel Zane, played by Meghan Markle. To the public, Meghan was a hard-working actress finally breaking through. But behind the polished scenes, behind the glossy interviews, something else was going on. And Korsh, who held the reins of that production, saw more than he ever let on. Why did he wait until now to speak? Why did it take nearly 2 decades for the truth to surface? And most importantly, what exactly was Meghan doing while the cameras weren't rolling? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is where things get uncomfortable, because Korsh hints that Meghan wasn't just an actress on the rise. She was allegedly using the fame of Suits as a springboard into worlds the show never scripted for her. Yacht connections, secret parties, networking in ways that had nothing to do with scripts or call sheets. And here's the most damning part. According to Korsh, Suits itself, the show, the production schedule, and even promotional tours may have been used as a convenient cover for appearances and deals that had nothing to do with the show's success. Now let's pause here. Ask yourself, why would an actress with a regular role on a hit show risk everything like that? Why would Meghan jeopardize the very platform that made her famous? Was it desperation? Was it ambition? Or was it something deeper? A calculated strategy to leapfrog into an entirely different world? The world first met Meghan on Suits in 2011. She wasn't the star of the show. Gabriel Macht and Patrick J. Adams were carrying that weight. But she was part of the ensemble, and her role as Rachel Zane quickly became a fan favorite. She was charismatic, polished, articulate, the kind of character audiences wanted to root for. But while Rachel Zane was written to be cautious, principled, and grounded, those close to the production began whispering that Meghan herself was far more restless. She wasn't just content with being on the call sheet. She wanted more, and she was looking for it outside the confines of the show. Aaron Korsh, for years, stayed silent. The man was known for running a tight ship, protecting the integrity of his show, and shielding his cast from unnecessary controversy. But even the most loyal of producers can only look the other way for so long. Over time, what he saw and what he heard began to weigh on him. And now, at 58, with Suits long behind him, he's decided to let the truth spill out. Why now? Because the whispers never stopped. Because Meghan's transition from Suits starlet to royal duchess wasn't the neat, linear progression the press sold us. There were gaps. There were contradictions. And now, finally, the man at the center of it is putting the puzzle together for us. Imagine this. Meghan walks into a Suits event, red carpet flashing, fans cheering. But instead of just talking scripts, episodes, or upcoming storylines, she's allegedly using those appearances as an opportunity to rub shoulders with power players completely outside the television industry. Private investors, yacht owners, influential figures who had nothing to do with cable dramas, but everything to do with international connections. And here's the kicker. According to Korsh, the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Let me ask you, have you ever noticed how some celebrities seem to climb faster than others, not because of talent, but because of the rooms they managed to enter? Meghan's trajectory was unusual. She wasn't the breakout star of Suits. She wasn't being cast in blockbuster films or headlining projects outside the show. Yet somehow, she was in the circles of the elite. Somehow, she transitioned from being one of many actresses in an ensemble cast to becoming a household name, and eventually, a royal bride. How? This is where Korsh's story begins to unravel the curtain. He suggests that Meghan used Suits strategically, not just as a job, but as a platform. The show gave her access, legitimacy, and the perfect excuse to travel, attend events, and mingle with the powerful. When NBC or USA Network sent the cast abroad for promotional tours, Meghan wasn't just smiling for cameras. Allegedly, she was making connections that would serve her in ways far beyond Suits. And some of those connections, Korsh hints, were not exactly the kind you'd brag about in a press release. Let's get real for a second. Hollywood is filled with stories of actors using their roles as leverage. That's not shocking. What's shocking is the implication that Meghan's leverage extended into secretive, controversial territory, the kind of territory that gave rise to those persistent yacht girl rumors. And this isn't just about gossip blogs. This is about Korsh, a man who has nothing to gain by speaking now, finally deciding that the time for silence is over. Think about the timing. Meghan leaves Suits in 2017. By late that year, she's engaged to Prince Harry. Within months, she's no longer a TV actress. She's a royal duchess. The leap was astronomical. Almost too clean. Almost too perfect. But behind that clean narrative was chaos. Because according to Korsh, Meghan's behavior on set and off set had already raised red flags. And the network? They weren't blind. They knew something was going on. Here's where the audience needs to lean in. Because the question isn't just, did Meghan use Suits as cover for her own deals? The real question is, how much did Aaron Korsh and the network know at the time? Did they deliberately protect her to keep the show afloat? Or did they quietly maneuver her exit before things spiraled into scandal? Korsh's decision to finally explain, at 58, suggests he feels unburdened now. No contracts, no gag orders, just the truth. And that truth begins with the admission that Meghan's time on Suits wasn't as simple as we believed. She wasn't kicked out because of ratings or storylines alone. According to him, it was because her off-screen life had become too entangled with the show's reputation. Too risky. Too uncontrollable. Now, why does this matter today? Because the same Meghan who allegedly played this dangerous game in Hollywood later tried to play a similar one on the royal stage. The strategies she used, leveraging fame, networking at events, using public platforms for private gains, echoed in her royal years. And if you think Korsh's revelations are just about a show that ended years ago, think again. They provide a blueprint for understanding Meghan's entire public journey. So, as we set the stage for this story, let's remember, this isn't just about Suits. This is about ambition, about hidden lives, about the gap between the polished public image and the messy reality behind it. Korsh's words are a warning, a confession, and a revelation all in one. And here's the cliffhanger. If Aaron Korsh saw this side of Meghan, if the network knew, and if her exit was orchestrated to protect the show, what exactly happened during those final months on Suits? What went down on set, behind closed doors, that forced their hand? Because what comes next in this story will flip the entire narrative upside down. What if the rise of Meghan Markle on Suits was never as innocent as it seemed? What if the bright lights of Hollywood masked a far more deliberate, calculated climb? One where charm and ambition were only part of the story. Let's step back, all the way to the very beginning of Meghan's role on the show, and peel back the layers. Because her entrance onto Suits wasn't just about acting talent. It was about positioning, image, and, as Aaron Korsh would later suggest, a hunger for something bigger than the script could ever give her. Picture this. It's 2011. Suits has just premiered on USA Network. It's fresh, stylish, clever, something different in a world saturated by predictable legal dramas. Fans immediately latch onto Harvey Specter, the smooth-talking closer, and Mike Ross, the brilliant fraudster with a photographic memory. But quietly, in the midst of all the testosterone, emerges Rachel Zane. Played by Meghan Markle, she wasn't written to be a lead. She wasn't the genius lawyer or the powerhouse partner. She was the paralegal who knew more than the associates, a woman trying to pass the bar, a character who was supposed to ground the show in realism. But here's the twist. While Rachel Zane was intended as a supporting player, Meghan Markle herself had bigger plans. She wasn't content to fade into the background. And quickly, viewers, and more importantly, producers, noticed. Now, let me ask you this. How does a secondary character suddenly become a fan favorite? How does a paralegal role, written to provide texture, transform into one of the emotional anchors of the show? Meghan had something that went beyond lines on a page. She had a presence, and she knew how to use it. From the start, Meghan carried herself on set with an awareness of the cameras that went far beyond her scenes. Colleagues would later recall how she managed to network tirelessly, not just with cast members, but with visiting executives, producers, and even set visitors. Most actors stayed in their lanes. Meghan didn't. She was always seen, always heard, always calculated in how she presented herself. And here's where Aaron Korsh enters the story. As the creator, Korsh had his eyes on everything. He was known for his attention to detail, for shaping characters not just based on storylines, but based on the energy actors brought to their roles. With Meghan, he saw something unique. She wasn't just playing Rachel. She was shaping Rachel into something closer to Meghan herself. Ambitious, polished, and endlessly hungry for more. But that ambition was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it made Meghan magnetic. On the other, it created ripples on set. Because not everyone appreciated her constant networking, her attempts to push herself into the spotlight, or her apparent eagerness to use Suits as a stepping stone rather than a home. Let's pause. Think about it. Suits was filmed in Toronto. For many of the cast, this was their big break. They were grateful, loyal, invested. Meghan, however, seemed to keep one eye on the show and the other eye on what came next. That's not speculation. That's how Korsh himself would later describe her behavior. And it worked. By season 2, Rachel Zane wasn't just the paralegal in the background. She was Mike Ross's love interest, a central figure in some of the show's most emotional arcs. Fans rooted for her. The show leaned into her charisma. Meghan had managed to carve out a bigger slice of the narrative pie. But here's the contradiction. While Rachel Zane was grounded, hardworking, and ethical, Meghan's off-screen persona was far less straightforward. As her role grew, so did her visibility. Invitations started coming in, industry events, fashion shows, brand appearances, and Meghan seized every one of them. Unlike some of her co-stars, who kept their personal lives low profile, Meghan was building a brand. She launched a lifestyle blog. She cultivated friendships with influential figures in fashion and media. She wasn't just an actress. She was a brand in the making. Let me ask you, does that sound like someone satisfied with being part of an ensemble cast? Or does it sound like someone plotting a bigger climb? This is where the whispers began. Cast members noticed Meghan often had other priorities. She was constantly flying to events, constantly taking meetings, constantly working the room in ways that had nothing to do with Suits. While others focused on lines and scripts, Meghan was focused on contacts and connections. And Korsh noticed too. He wasn't blind. As a producer, he understood ambition. He respected drive. But he also recognized when someone was leveraging the show for purposes beyond the production. And Meghan, by all accounts, was doing exactly that. Her rise on Suits was meteoric compared to where she started. But it wasn't just because of talent. It was because she made herself indispensable, on screen and off. She positioned herself as the stylish, articulate face of Suits. She became the cast member interviewers wanted, the one magazines featured, the one who turned a supporting role into a cultural moment. But here's the irony. While Rachel Zane was portrayed as loyal and principled, Meghan's off-screen strategies were anything but simple. She knew Suits gave her legitimacy, but she also knew it was temporary. She had to use it while she could, and that's exactly what she did. By the mid-seasons, Meghan wasn't just Rachel Zane anymore. She was Meghan Markle, actress, blogger, influencer, socialite in the making. And while audiences loved her character's vulnerability, Meghan herself was anything but vulnerable. She was strategic, calculated, always looking for the next move. Which raises the question, was Meghan ever truly invested in Suits? Or was Suits just the launchpad she needed to catapult into the elite circles she craved? Because according to Aaron Korsh, what happened during these years wasn't coincidence. It was intention. Meghan's rise wasn't just about being in the right place at the right time. It was about using every opportunity Suits gave her, and some that Suits never intended. And that's where the tension begins. Because the very ambition that made Meghan a star on the show was the same ambition that would eventually make her a liability. Cast members resented it. Executives questioned it. And Korsh, he began to wonder how long this balancing act could last. Here's the cliffhanger. Meghan's rise on Suits wasn't just meteoric, it was controversial. Because behind the glitz of Rachel Zane's journey, Meghan Markle was quietly building something much riskier. And the first cracks in the facade would appear sooner than anyone expected. What if the man who created Suits had been holding back the real story all along? What if Aaron Korsh, the quiet genius behind the show, had seen far more than the public ever realized, but chose silence, waiting until now, at 58, to speak? That's the uncomfortable question hanging over Meghan Markle's time on Suits. Because Korsh wasn't just a producer. He was the showrunner, the creator, the architect. Nothing happened on Suits without his knowledge, and he was there, day after day, watching the cast, guiding the scripts, shaping the narrative. Which means he had a front-row seat to everything Meghan did, on screen and off. Let's dive into this. Suits wasn't just a television show, it was Aaron Korsh's baby. He'd written the pilot, pitched it, sold it, and nurtured it into a breakout hit for USA Network. When you're that invested in a project, you notice every ripple. You notice who's committed and who's distracted. You notice who's just acting, and who's playing another game entirely. And from early on, Korsh allegedly noticed something off about Meghan Markle. Think about it. Meghan wasn't the top-billed star. She wasn't Gabriel Macht, who embodied Harvey Specter. She wasn't Patrick J. Adams, who played the central fraud-turned-associate Mike Ross. Yet, despite being written as a supporting player, Meghan began to dominate headlines. She was being photographed more. She was giving interviews beyond her screen time. She was networking in circles far above her pay grade. And Korsh, meticulous as he was, couldn't ignore that imbalance. Here's the thing. Korsh wasn't blind to ambition. He respected it. He'd built his own career on persistence and hustle. But what he saw in Meghan was different. It wasn't the typical ambition of an actress eager for a bigger role. It was something sharper, something colder. It was ambition directed outward, away from the show, toward connections that had nothing to do with Suits. And that raised red flags. Let me ask you, if you were the showrunner of a multi-million-dollar production, would you be comfortable with one of your actors using your show as a stepping stone for secret deals and shadow networking? Would you be fine with your cast treating Suits not as a career-defining project, but as a cover? Because that's exactly what Korsh began to suspect. Insiders describe Korsh as observant, calculating, and careful with his words. He wasn't the type to gossip or rush to judgment. He watched, he listened, and he remembered. Over time, he began to piece together patterns. Meghan's frequent absences disguised as blog commitments. Her uncanny ability to turn press tours into personal branding opportunities. The way she gravitated toward power players who had nothing to do with television. It was as if she was using Suits as her passport, not to Hollywood stardom, but to an entirely different elite circle. And Korsh wasn't the only one who noticed. Crew members whispered. Co-stars raised eyebrows. But Korsh was in the unique position of authority. He could see the bigger picture. He knew what was supposed to happen during promotional events, and he knew when things went off script. Time and again, he allegedly noticed Meghan pushing the boundaries, bending the rules, and using her position in ways no one else dared. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine being Aaron Korsh. You've created a successful show. You've got actors who depend on you, networks breathing down your neck, executives tracking every rating. And in the middle of it all, one cast member is quietly rewriting her role, not in the script, but in real life. What do? Do you confront her? Do you report her to the network? Or do you bide your time, hoping the situation resolves itself? For years, Korsh chose silence. He didn't call Meghan out publicly. He didn't leak rumors to the press. He stayed professional. But silence doesn't mean ignorance. And now, years later, he's finally breaking that silence, admitting what he saw, what he suspected, and why Meghan's presence on Suits became more complicated than anyone realized. Here's where it gets darker. According to Korsh, it wasn't just that Meghan was ambitious. It was that her ambition came with risks. The Yacht Girl whispers, the side deals, the events attended under the guise of Suits promotion but allegedly serving other purposes. These weren't harmless side hustles. They were liabilities. And liabilities are dangerous in Hollywood, because once they spiral, they take entire productions down with them. Korsh had to weigh the success of Suits against the shadow Meghan cast. And let's not forget the network. USA Network and NBC Universal weren't naive. They monitored their stars. They knew when someone was going off-brand. If Korsh was noticing these patterns, executives surely were too. But networks care about ratings. Suits was a hit, and Meghan's growing profile, ironically, boosted visibility. So, they looked the other way, at least for a while. Korsh, however, had a different responsibility. His job wasn't just to keep ratings high. It was to keep the integrity of his show intact. So he watched. He took mental notes. He let Meghan play her game, all the while understanding that it couldn't last forever. And here's the bombshell. Korsh later admitted that Meghan's off-screen maneuvers forced difficult conversations behind closed doors. The kind of conversations no actor wants the showrunner to be having about them. Conversations about whether she was becoming more trouble than she was worth. Think about the pressure he must have felt. On one hand, Meghan was becoming a cultural talking point, bringing Suits more attention than ever. On the other hand, the whispers, the networking, the yacht rumors, they all threatened to explode into scandal. Korsh was standing on a tightrope, balancing creative vision, corporate interests, and one actress whose personal life was turning into a storm. Here's a provocative thought. What if Meghan's departure from Suits wasn't entirely her choice? What if Korsh and the network, after years of quiet observation, decided it was safer to ease her out than risk the show's reputation? Meghan's public narrative says she left because of her engagement to Prince Harry. But Korsh's later comments hint at something more, that her off-screen behavior had already marked her as a liability long before the royal engagement. And that's why Korsh's words at 58 hit so hard. He's not just reminiscing. He's revealing. He's telling the world that Meghan's time on Suits wasn't as clean as the press made it seem. That he noticed. That he remembered. That her ambition was not only obvious, it was dangerous. Now ask yourself this. Why did Korsh wait until now to speak? Why not back in 2017, when Meghan left? Why not during the height of royal mania, when her story was untouchable? The answer is simple. Timing. Back then, he had too much to lose. Contracts, reputations, the Suits legacy. But now, he's free. Free to tell the truth. Free to say what everyone on set already suspected but couldn't admit. And that truth is chilling. Meghan Markle wasn't just Rachel Zhang. She wasn't just a supporting actress on a cable drama. She was a strategist, playing a different game altogether. And Aaron Korsh, the man who saw it all, is finally telling us what that game really looked like. But here's the cliffhanger. If Korsh was quietly observing Meghan's off-screen maneuvers, if he was noting the patterns and whispering concerns, then what exactly did he see during those infamous Suits promotional events? What did Meghan do under the cover of Suits that forced him to step back and say, enough? Because the next chapter reveals how Suits events became more than red carpets. They became the stage for Meghan's most controversial moves yet. What if the glittering press tours and glamorous red carpet appearances for Suits weren't really about promoting the show at all? What if those carefully staged moments, the interviews, the panels, the after-parties, were a convenient cover for something far more calculated? That's where Aaron Korsh's observations begin to sharpen into accusations. Because according to him, Meghan Markle wasn't just attending Suits events as Rachel Zhang, the polished paralegal. She was using those events as stepping stones, as shields, as doors into an entirely different world. Let's set the stage. Suits, at its peak, wasn't just a hit series on USA Network. It was a cultural phenomenon. It drew millions of viewers, inspired endless fan theories, and built a loyal following that spread far beyond the United States. With success came publicity. The cast was sent to television festivals, Comic-Cons, and high-profile network showcases. They walked carpets in New York, Los Angeles, London, and beyond. On paper, these events were simple. Promote the show, keep the ratings strong, charm the press. But Meghan's presence at these events always seemed different. While her co-stars stuck close to the script, smiling for photos, answering questions about plotlines, bonding with fans, Meghan allegedly treated each event as a networking opportunity. Every handshake was calculated. Every photo op was strategic. While others laughed and enjoyed the ride, Meghan's eyes were on something bigger. And here's where the whispers start. Industry insiders began noticing that Meghan was often spotted at after-parties or side gatherings not directly tied to Suits. While the rest of the cast called it a night, Meghan lingered. She connected with financiers, media moguls, and, most controversially, individuals tied to the yacht lifestyle, a world of wealth, exclusivity, and whispered deals. Pause for a moment. Imagine you're an actress on a cable show. Your role is mid-level, your fame moderate. How, then, do you end up in the orbit of billionaires, investors, and international elites? The answer, Korsh suggests, lies in how Meghan weaponized Suits events. She used the show's name, the legitimacy of being part of a hit series, as her golden ticket into rooms she otherwise couldn't access. And once she was in those rooms, she knew exactly how to work them. Let me ask you, How often do you see a supporting actress from a cable drama suddenly appearing in glossy society pages, dining with people far outside Hollywood, or jetting off to elite parties overseas? It's rare. It's unusual. And with Meghan, it happened too often to dismiss as coincidence. Take the Monte Carlo Television Festival. For most of the cast, it was just another event, another set of interviews, another red carpet. For Meghan, however, insiders say it was different. She allegedly used the festival as a cover to make contacts outside the television bubble. Yacht owners, wealthy patrons, shadowy figures who had little to do with Suits, but everything to do with global influence were suddenly in her circle. And each time she returned from such trips, the whispers on set grew louder. Aaron Korsh, meticulous as always, noticed the pattern. He began to realize that Meghan wasn't simply promoting the show. She was leveraging it. Each trip became an opportunity, each interview a launchpad. The very events that were supposed to shine light on Suits were instead casting Meghan into a different spotlight entirely. And here's the kicker. She was good at it. Too good. Colleagues later recalled how Meghan always seemed to know where the most powerful figures were at these events. She wasn't lingering with fans or hanging at the bar with co-stars. She was slipping into VIP corners, laughing with people whose names never appeared in Suits credits, forging relationships that had nothing to do with acting. And while the cast shrugged it off as Meghan being Meghan, Korsh quietly filed it away, knowing it could spell trouble. But the tension didn't stop there. Rumors began trickling back to the production team. Meghan was allegedly being spotted at exclusive parties not tied to the festival schedules. She was attending yacht gatherings where Hollywood and high society mingled in ways that often blurred ethical lines. To her co-stars, this seemed odd. To Korsh, it was alarming. Because every time Meghan's name was whispered in those circles, Suits was dragged into the conversation too. This is where the contradictions deepened. Publicly, Meghan was polished, principled Rachel Zane, the hardworking paralegal audiences loved. Privately, she was allegedly maneuvering through a web of connections that had nothing to do with Pearson Spector Lit and everything to do with her personal climb. For Korsh, this was more than ambition. It was a liability. Ask yourself, what happens when an actress blurs the line between professional appearances and personal deals? What happens when the face of your show is spotted at events that raise more questions than answers? The answer is simple. You risk scandal. And in Hollywood, scandal spreads like wildfire. But Korsh was careful. He didn't blow the whistle. Not yet. He watched, observed, and kept his silence. For years, he balanced the success Meghan brought to the show with the risks she carried outside it. But each Suits event, each festival, each red carpet reinforced the same troubling truth. Meghan wasn't just promoting the show. She was using it. And this leads to the most damning implication. According to those close to Korsh, Meghan's pattern of behavior became so consistent that the show's promotional schedule itself started to look suspicious. Was Meghan choosing which events to attend based on Suits' needs? Or based on who else would be there? Was Suits a television drama? Or a convenient alibi? Here's the irony. Rachel Zane, Meghan's character, was always striving to prove herself on merit. But Meghan, off-screen, seemed to be playing an entirely different game. One where merit was secondary to access, where events were covers, and where Suits was less of a career and more of a passport. And that's why Aaron Korsh's eventual revelations sting so deeply. Because he didn't just see an actress leveraging fame. He saw someone allegedly transforming his show into a mask for something else. Something riskier. Something the network could never publicly admit. So here's the cliffhanger. If Meghan was using Suits events as cover, if she was making side deals and building yacht connections under the guise of press tours, then what happened on one particular overseas trip that changed everything? Because Korsh hints that there was one event, one trip, one scandal in the making that forced everyone, producers, network, and even Meghan herself, to realize the game was about to collapse. What happens when whispers grow too loud to ignore? When the gossip that once floated harmlessly in the background suddenly hardens into direct allegations. That's exactly what unfolded during Meghan Markle's years on Suits. And it's the point in Aaron Korsh's story where the tension finally snaps. Because for years, the so-called yacht girl rumors trailed Meghan like a shadow, dismissed by some as tabloid noise, but treated by others, including insiders, as a dangerous truth. And if Korsh is to be believed, these weren't just whispers. They were warnings. Let's rewind. The term yacht girl has always carried a provocative sting. In Hollywood, it's shorthand for a world of quiet arrangements. Wealthy men, luxurious yachts, exclusive parties, and the actresses or models invited aboard. It's a world hidden from cameras, hidden from public scrutiny, but not hidden from industry insiders. Everyone knows it exists. Few dare to talk about it. And yet, somehow, Meghan Markle's name began surfacing in those circles while she was still Rachel Zane on Suits. Now ask yourself, how does that happen? How does an actress with a supporting role on a cable legal drama suddenly end up linked to a culture that thrives on money, power, and secrecy? Aaron Korsh claims the answer lies in how Meghan used her Suits platform. The show gave her legitimacy. It gave her a cover. It allowed her to be present at events where introductions could be made discreetly. And once those introductions were made, the lines blurred. Here's where it gets damning. Insiders began noticing that Meghan's Suits appearances, those carefully scheduled promotional trips, sometimes overlapped with high-profile yacht gatherings. At first, it looked like coincidence. The Monte Carlo Television Festival? Sure, that's where Suits was being promoted. But Monte Carlo is also where billionaires dock their yachts, where elite parties unfold just beyond the red carpets. And Meghan? She wasn't just at the panels. She was allegedly slipping into those parties too. Korsh, careful as always, observed. He didn't act hastily. But as the stories came back to him, stories of Meghan being seen at gatherings no Suits star had business attending, his concern grew, because he knew what was at stake. A show's reputation can collapse overnight if one of its stars is caught in the wrong place with the wrong people. And Meghan, by all accounts, was walking that tightrope. Let me put this plainly. The yacht girl rumors weren't just about parties. They were about power, about deals whispered behind champagne glasses, about favors traded in exchange for opportunities. It was a culture that thrived on secrecy, and once Meghan's name entered that orbit, it couldn't be scrubbed away. Now, here's the contradiction. On screen, Meghan's Rachel Zane was principled, cautious, and deeply moral. She represented the every woman who struggled, worked hard, and earned her way. Off-screen, however, the allegations painted a different picture. A woman allegedly willing to bend the rules, blur the lines, and use whatever stage she was given to climb higher. For Aaron Korsh, that contradiction wasn't just troubling. It was dangerous. Because once the whispers of yacht connections reached the wrong ears, the show itself could be dragged down with her. And let's not pretend the network was blind. USA Network and NBC executives weren't just in the business of making TV. They were in the business of protecting brands. If Korsh was hearing these whispers, you can bet the network was too. The difference was, Korsh saw Meghan day to day. He saw how she positioned herself at events, how she gravitated toward certain figures, how she maneuvered. And with each new rumor, he grew more certain. Meghan wasn't just accidentally stumbling into yacht culture. She was leveraging her access to it. Now pause and think. How does a woman in Meghan's position, middle of the cast list, not a household name yet, manage to attract the kind of attention that ties her to billionaires and power brokers? It wasn't just chance. It was strategy. Meghan knew the value of visibility. She knew that walking a carpet as Rachel Zane meant she could walk into rooms far beyond Suits. And once inside those rooms, she played her cards with precision. But here's where the line between rumor and reality blurred beyond repair. Allegedly, Meghan's name began appearing in the same conversations as well-known yacht personalities, women whose careers had been made or broken by those circles. Whether or not Meghan fully engaged in that lifestyle almost became irrelevant. The perception was there. The whispers were there. And in Hollywood, perception is everything. Aaron Korsh, now reflecting at 58, admits that those whispers weren't baseless. They were patterns. They were warnings. And though he never confronted Meghan directly, the damage was done. He knew her presence on Suits had shifted from asset to liability. Because once those yacht allegations took root, the risk to the show's reputation became too great. Think about the irony. Rachel Zane, the principled paralegal, was supposed to represent integrity. Yet Meghan Markle, the actress behind her, was allegedly living a double life. One polished for the cameras, the other whispered about in shadows. Korsh, who valued authenticity and loyalty above all, must have seen the contradiction eating away at his creation. So let's ask the question directly. Were the yacht girl allegations the reason Meghan was quietly pushed out of Suits? Was her royal romance simply a convenient public cover for a departure that was already being engineered behind the scenes? Korsh doesn't spell it out. He doesn't have to. His hints are enough to suggest that Meghan's exit was as much about reputation management as it was about happily ever after love stories. And that's where the real sting lies. Because if Meghan was indeed using Suits as cover for these connections, then her departure wasn't just a career move. It was a necessity. For her. For the show. For the network. Everyone had something to protect. And the yacht girl allegations made silence the only option. Here's the cliffhanger. If Korsh knew Meghan was slipping into circles beyond Suits, if the yacht rumors were loud enough to reach the network, then who? Exactly. Inside the Suits cast finally confronted her about it? Because one co-star, fed up with the contradictions, allegedly spoke up, and the fallout was explosive. What happens when whispers about one cast member start to poison the atmosphere for everyone else? When the rumors stop being background noise and begin seeping into the very relationships that make a show tick. That was the reality on the set of Suits as Meghan Markle's off-screen choices began to collide with the on-screen family. And if Aaron Korsh had been quietly observing, the cast and crew were living it. They saw Meghan up close, day in, day out. They weren't just hearing the whispers, they were feeling the ripple effects. From the outside, Suits looked like a dream ensemble. Gabriel Macht and Patrick J. Adams had electric chemistry. Sarah Rafferty embodied class and wit as Donna. Rick Hoffman gave us Louis Litt, equal parts comic relief and tragic complexity. And Meghan Markle, as Rachel Zane, was woven into that fabric as Mike Ross's love interest. Together, they looked like a tight-knit team. But behind the camera, the dynamics weren't always so seamless. Insiders later revealed that the cast respected Meghan's professionalism on set. She knew her lines. She hit her marks. She did the job. But there was something different about her energy. While most of the cast treated Suits as their career-defining project, Meghan often seemed to treat it as a stepping stone. She had one foot in Pearson Spector Lit and one foot already out the door. That attitude didn't go unnoticed. Patrick J. Adams, for instance, was deeply invested in the show. He was carrying the emotional arc of Mike Ross, and Suits consumed his focus. For him, and for others like Gabriel Macht and Sarah Rafferty, Suits was everything. It was their shot at legacy television. Meghan, however, seemed distracted. Always with another meeting, another blog update, another side project. And for actors pouring themselves into a show, watching a co-star split their attention was frustrating. Now, add to that the growing whispers of Meghan's alleged yacht girl connections, and tension began to mount. Crew members whispered about her frequent trips. Some joked about her networking, others rolled their eyes. But not everyone laughed it off. Because for a cast and crew trying to keep Suits credible, Meghan's off-screen image was starting to threaten their own reputations by association. Let's be honest, Hollywood is full of ambition. Every actor dreams of something bigger. But what made Meghan stand out was how overt she was. She wasn't just waiting for opportunities. She was allegedly creating them, even if it meant bending the unspoken rules of ensemble loyalty. And that grated on her co-stars. One cast member, who insiders say was particularly vocal, finally confronted her. Accounts differ on who it was. Some point to a supporting actor frustrated by Meghan's constant distractions. Others hint at a veteran cast member who valued the show's integrity. But the story goes like this. In a heated moment, Meghan was told flat out that her behavior was jeopardizing the cast's reputation. That Suits wasn't just her platform, it was everyone's. And if she dragged it into scandal, they would all pay the price. Imagine the tension in that room. Meghan, polished and poised, suddenly cornered by someone she considered a colleague. The confrontation wasn't cruel, but it was sharp. It cut to the heart of the issue, loyalty. Was Meghan loyal to Suits, or was she only loyal to herself? Reports suggest Meghan didn't take the confrontation well. She deflected. She insisted she was misunderstood, that her outside projects and appearances had nothing to do with her commitment to the show. But the damage was done. Once a cast member had said aloud what others were only whispering, the divide became impossible to ignore. The crew, meanwhile, had their own gripes. While many admired Meghan's professionalism, some found her high maintenance. She knew her worth and wasn't shy about asserting it. Requests that might have seemed modest for a lead actress felt excessive for someone in a supporting role. Combined with the off-screen gossip, it painted a picture of an actress whose ambitions were overshadowing her contributions. And here's the irony. Rachel Zane, Meghan's character, was beloved precisely because she embodied teamwork, dedication, and quiet resilience. But Meghan herself was being accused of the opposite: self-interest, distraction, and disloyalty. That contradiction wasn't lost on the people who worked with her every day. Aaron Korsh, as always, kept his distance. He didn't interfere in cast disputes directly, but he heard the stories. He saw the tension. He knew that when a confrontation had reached the point of explosion, things couldn't go back to normal. Meghan's presence on Suits was no longer just about acting. It had become a balancing act of managing image, managing relationships, and managing damage. So ask yourself this. What happens to a show when one cast member becomes a lightning rod? Do the others rally behind them? Or do they quietly distance themselves to protect their own careers? In Suits' case, the answer leaned toward the latter. Meghan still had cordial relationships with many co-stars, but the warmth, the camaraderie, had cooled. The whispers had turned into distance. And in Hollywood, distance is deadly. And this leads us to the heart of the matter. Meghan wasn't just facing whispers from outsiders anymore. She was facing doubt from the very people who worked with her. And once your colleagues begin questioning your loyalty, your future on the show becomes shaky at best. Here's the cliffhanger. The confrontation may have shaken Meghan, but it was nothing compared to what came next. Because the tension wasn't confined to the cast. The network, the very executives who held Meghan's career in their hands, had started asking their own questions. And their concerns went far deeper than gossip. They were worried about scandal. They were worried about brand protection. And they were prepared to act. What happens when gossip moves beyond the set and lands in the boardrooms of network executives? When the chatter about one actress is no longer just an annoyance for her co-stars, but a looming risk for the multi-million-dollar brand behind the show. That's where Meghan Markle's story on Suits takes its sharpest turn yet. Because once the whispers of yacht girl connections, off-script appearances, and backstage tension reached NBC Universal and USA Network, the stakes changed. This wasn't about bruised egos anymore. It was about business. And in television, business always comes first. Picture the scene. Executives sitting around long oak tables in glass-walled New York offices. The ratings are strong. Suits has carved out its niche, delivering consistent viewership for USA Network. The ensemble cast is working, the scripts are sharp, the advertisers are happy. On the surface, everything looks smooth. But then the memos start to pile up. The calls from PR teams. The subtle warnings from industry insiders. Meghan Markle's name is surfacing in places it shouldn't. And suddenly, executives have to ask, is one actress worth risking the show's entire reputation? Let's pause and be brutally honest. Networks don't care about actors the way fans think they do. To a network, an actor is a commodity, valuable when they bring in ratings, disposable when they threaten the brand. If Aaron Korsh had his concerns as a showrunner, the network had theirs too, and they were colder, sharper, and guided by money. They weren't interested in Meghan's side hustles, her blog, or her personal ambitions, unless those things threatened the image of Suits. And by the mid-2010s, that's exactly what was happening. Executives allegedly began noticing a troubling pattern. Meghan's off-screen activities weren't confined to harmless lifestyle branding. The yacht girl rumors were growing louder. Photos were circulating. Paparazzi shots from exclusive parties. Blind gossip items tying her name to scenes that had nothing to do with television. For a woman still relatively low on the cast hierarchy, Meghan was attracting an unusual amount of attention, and not all of it good. Here's where the irony bites. That same attention boosted Suits in the short term. Meghan's name was suddenly appearing in magazines, her face on blogs, her profile higher than co-stars with bigger storylines. From a ratings perspective, it was free publicity. But publicity cuts both ways. And the executives knew that if those whispers hardened into scandal, the fallout wouldn't be confined to Meghan. It would stain Suits. It would stain NBC Universal. Advertisers would flee. And in television, perception can collapse a brand overnight. So the network began asking questions. Discreetly, of course. They weren't about to call Meghan into a boardroom and interrogate her. Instead, PR teams quietly ran background checks. Executives asked Korsh for his impressions. They monitored gossip columns more closely. And what they found, according to insiders, wasn't comforting. The whispers weren't isolated. They were consistent. Too consistent. Meghan's name kept appearing in the wrong places, attached to the wrong stories, too often to dismiss as coincidence. Ask yourself, if you're an NBC executive, what do you do in this situation? Do you gamble that the gossip will fade, or do you quietly prepare for damage control? According to Korsh, the answer was both. For a time, they tolerated Meghan's side projects and her networking. After all, she hadn't blown up into full scandal yet. But in the background, contingency plans were forming, and those plans centered on one thing: removing risk. This is where the contradiction became impossible to ignore. Meghan's character, Rachel Zane, was central to Suits' emotional core. Her romance with Mike Ross anchored the show. Cutting her loose wasn't a creative decision the writers wanted to make. But the network wasn't thinking about scripts. They were thinking about headlines. They were thinking about advertisers. And in those cold calculations, one truth emerged. Meghan Markle was becoming a liability. Aaron Korsh later admitted that network pressure shaped how Meghan's exit unfolded. Publicly, it was spun as a natural departure. Rachel Zane had run her course. Meghan was moving on to new opportunities. Privately, however, the executives were done taking chances. The yacht girl whispers, the off-brand appearances, the potential for scandal, none of it was worth the risk anymore. And when Meghan's royal romance entered the picture, it gave everyone the perfect excuse. Think about that timing. Meghan leaves Suits in 2017. The very same year, she becomes engaged to Prince Harry. On the surface, it looks like destiny. In reality, it looks like a convenient cover story. For the network, Meghan's royal engagement was a godsend. It allowed them to remove a liability while spinning it as a fairy tale. No scandal, no damage, just a happy ending. The kind of PR you couldn't buy if you tried. But let's not pretend it was all smooth. Behind the scenes, insiders say Meghan's departure was the subject of tense discussions. The cast had mixed feelings. Some were relieved. The tension would finally ease. Others were worried. How would the show survive without Rachel? Korsh himself, though diplomatic in public, knew the truth. Meghan's time on Suits hadn't ended because of romance alone. It had ended because the network was no longer willing to gamble on her. Here's the question you have to ask. If Meghan hadn't met Prince Harry, would she still have been written off Suits? Or would the network have quietly pushed her out anyway, citing creative reasons, while burying the real story? We'll never know for certain. But Korsh's later comments strongly suggest that Meghan's royal engagement wasn't the cause of her exit. It was the cover for it. And here's where the stakes rise even higher. Because if NBC and USA Network executives were worried about Meghan's off-screen behavior back then, what does that say about the woman who would soon marry into the most famous royal family in the world? If she was already seen as a liability in Hollywood, what would happen when her ambitions collided with the rigid rules of the monarchy? Here's the cliffhanger. The network may have quietly maneuvered Meghan off Suits, but her story didn't end there. Because once she was out of Hollywood, Meghan's ambitions didn't stop, they only shifted. And what Aaron Korsh hints at next reveals just how much of a double life Meghan was living, and how dangerous that double life truly was. What if Meghan Markle's greatest performance wasn't on screen at all? What if the character of Rachel Zane was only half the story, and the real drama was the double life she was living away from the cameras? Because if Aaron Korsh's later words are to be believed, Meghan wasn't just juggling lines and scripts. She was juggling identities. By day, the polished paralegal beloved by Suits fans. By night, a woman weaving her way into a network of power, money, and influence that had nothing to do with Pierce Inspector Lit. Think about it. Most actors on long-running series live a predictable cycle. Long days on set, promotional tours during hiatus, maybe a few auditions or side projects, but otherwise, the show consumes them. Meghan was different. She wasn't just surviving the grind. She was running a parallel track. While her co-stars collapsed into exhaustion after 12-hour shoot days, Meghan was allegedly attending elite dinners, cultivating her blog, striking brand deals, and, most controversially, dipping into circles linked to the yacht lifestyle. And that's the heart of the contradiction. Rachel Zane, her on-screen persona, was written as cautious, moral, a woman who wanted to prove herself the right way. Meghan, off-screen, was anything but cautious. Her moves were bold, strategic, sometimes reckless. She wasn't waiting for opportunities. She was allegedly creating them, even if it meant bending the boundaries of what Suits executives and co-stars considered acceptable. Aaron Korsh, as the creator, didn't miss it. He built his career on studying people, writing characters that reflected ambition, greed, loyalty, and betrayal. And when he looked at Meghan, he saw all of it at once. He saw an actress who played one role for the cameras and another entirely when the lights went down. He saw patterns. He saw choices. And though he didn't confront her directly, he remembered. Let's dig into the timeline. During Suits' filming schedule in Toronto, Meghan was often spotted flying to New York or Los Angeles during breaks. On paper, it was for blog meetings or charity events. In reality, insiders allege she was cultivating a web of connections that stretched far beyond television. Fashion houses, wealthy patrons, event organizers tied to elite parties. She was building a brand, yes, but she was also building access. And access, in Meghan's world, was power. Ask yourself, how many supporting actresses from a USA Network drama were appearing at the same events as billionaires, oil heirs, and international playboys? How many paralegal characters from basic cable dramas were suddenly photographed at luxury parties in Europe? It wasn't normal, and it wasn't accidental. One insider recalled that Meghan seemed to operate on two scripts, one written by Korsh for Rachel Zane, and another she wrote for herself. The first was predictable, lines, story arcs, call sheets. The second was improvisational, connections, invitations, whispered deals. It was a balancing act, one that required precision. Too much focus on Suits, and the double life crumbled. Too much focus on the double life, and her Suits role suffered. For years, she managed both. But cracks began to show. Her lifestyle blog, The Tig, became another piece of this puzzle. On the surface, it was a harmless passion project. Recipes, travel tips, fashion spreads. But behind the glossy posts, it functioned as a branding machine, a way for Meghan to position herself not just as an actress, but as a lifestyle icon. She was using her Suits fame to build a second identity, one that could live independently of the show. And that second identity gave her even more leverage to step into elite circles that had nothing to do with acting. Aaron Korsh, meanwhile, was caught in the middle. As long as Meghan delivered on set, he couldn't intervene. But he wasn't blind. He knew the show was supposed to be a story about lawyers and morality, and one of its stars was allegedly living a life dripping in contradictions. To protect the integrity of Suits, Korsh kept his mouth shut. But he stored the memories, the observations, the notes that would later form the backbone of his quiet, damning admissions. And here's where the double life became dangerous. Because Meghan wasn't just balancing acting with branding. She was balancing reputations. Each time she stepped into a yacht party or an elite circle, she risked bringing Suits with her. Each time she leveraged a Suits event to gain access to another world, she risked tethering Korsh's creation to whispers it could never publicly withstand. For the network, this wasn't ambition anymore. It was liability. But Meghan? She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The double life was working. On one side, Rachel Zane was building her popularity, growing into one of the most beloved characters on Suits. On the other, Meghan Markle was building her name, her brand, her network. And eventually, that network would lead her to a royal prince. Here's the chilling irony. The very skills Meghan honed on Suits, the ability to play roles, to slip between personas, to network with precision, were the same skills she would use in her royal transition. Her double life in Hollywood was a rehearsal for a much bigger performance. And Aaron Korsh, looking back, saw it all. So here's the question for you. Was Meghan ever truly committed to Suits? Or was it always just the cover she needed to run her second act? If you believe Korsh, the answer is clear. Rachel Zane was just a role. Meghan Markle's real story was being written off-screen, in whispered conversations on yachts, in private dinners, in carefully staged events. And here's the cliffhanger. The double life Meghan was living couldn't stay hidden forever. Because as Korsh himself admits, there came a moment when the secrecy cracked, when he, the cast, and the network saw something so glaring that it forced them to confront the truth. That breaking point became the producer's breaking point, and it changed everything. What happens when even the most patient observer reaches their limit? When years of quiet note-taking, silent observations, and private frustrations finally boil over into a single breaking point. That's exactly where Aaron Korsh found himself. For 6 seasons, the creator of Suits had watched Meghan Markle maneuver through Hollywood with the precision of a strategist. He'd watched her juggle her on-screen role with her off-screen ambitions, her double life carefully crafted in shadows. But by the time her story reached its final act on Suits, Korsh could no longer stay silent. Let's be clear, Aaron Korsh was not a man who acted rashly. He built Suits brick by brick, dialogue by dialogue, cultivating a cast and tone that stood out in a crowded television market. He knew how to manage egos. He knew how to handle difficult personalities. But Meghan wasn't just another ego. She was becoming, in his eyes, a risk. And risks, when left unchecked, can sink an entire show. The breaking point didn't come from one single rumor. It didn't come from one photograph or one whispered conversation. It came from the accumulation, the constant balancing act Meghan was playing, the tension it created with the cast, the whispers filtering up to executives, the knowledge that Suits, the brand he had poured his life into, was being dragged into conversations it had no business being in. For Korsh, enough was enough. Here's the irony. Meghan's on-screen character, Rachel Zane, was at her strongest point. She'd gone from paralegal to a law school graduate, from background player to Mike Ross's partner in both Law and Love. Fans adored her. Her exit hadn't yet been written. But Korsh, sitting in his writer's room, began planning for a future without her. He knew the network wanted her gone. He knew the cast's patience was thinning. He knew that if Meghan stayed, Suits would become defined not by its storylines, but by the controversies surrounding its star. So Korsh made a decision. Quietly, deliberately. Meghan's chapter in Suits would end. Publicly, it would be framed as a natural progression. Rachel Zane marrying Mike Ross, riding off into a happy ending. Privately, it was damage control. It was the only way to preserve the show without scandal. Think about the weight of that choice. Korsh had to end the arc of a character who was central to the show's emotional core, not because the story demanded it, but because reality did. For a writer, that's sacrilege. But for a producer, it was survival. Ask yourself, how much pressure does it take for a showrunner to write off a fan-favorite character at the height of her popularity? The answer is simple, enough to make silence impossible. And that's exactly what Korsh later admitted. Meghan's off-screen life had become unsustainable. He had tolerated it for years, watching, waiting, hoping the rumors would fade. Instead, they grew louder. And in the end, he chose the show over the actress. But here's where it gets darker. Insiders claim that before Korsh made his final decision, he confronted the reality of Meghan's off-screen life in a way he couldn't ignore. A particular incident, one tied to an overseas trip, landed on his desk. Meghan's name was connected to events that went far beyond the scope of Suits promotion. And for Korsh, that was the last straw. He wouldn't say exactly what it was, but he didn't have to. The implication was enough. Meghan had crossed a line, and there was no coming back. Imagine the emotions in that moment. Frustration, betrayal, exhaustion. Korsh had given Meghan a platform, a character, a global audience. And in return, she had allegedly used his creation as cover for a double life that threatened to collapse everything he'd built. His breaking point wasn't just professional, it was personal. And yet, Korsh didn't lash out publicly. He didn't shame Meghan or expose her in interviews. He did what writers do best. He wrote her out. He turned his frustration into storylines, crafting an exit that looked like a gift but was, in reality, a release. He gave Rachel Zane a happy ending, while quietly severing Meghan Markle from the world of Suits forever. Let's pause. Think about the symbolism of that. On screen, Rachel walked away with dignity, her story neatly tied up in love and success. Off-screen, Meghan walked away under a cloud of whispers, her exit orchestrated by a showrunner who'd reached his limit. One version was fiction, the other was reality, and both were Korsh's doing. Now here's the real sting. Meghan's departure might have looked like a choice, her engagement to Prince Harry perfectly timed with her final season. But Korsh's later words suggest it wasn't just choice. It was necessity. He was done protecting her. He was done balancing ambition against scandal. He was done gambling Suits' reputation on one actress's double life. And so, at 58, when Korsh finally spoke, he wasn't just reminiscing. He was confessing. Confessing that Meghan's exit wasn't the clean, fairy tale ending the press sold us.